Hello and welcome to Lightways at Live Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and the wonderful and delightful Victor Olliver. Hello,
Hello.
Victor.
Hi, Anna. Lovely to see you again.
And I was giving your book a second read, and I know that you've been here to talk about draconic charts, but this time I thought it would be good to look at forecasting with draconic astrology because we never got round to that. So
No, we were too busy trying to explain what it is, draconic, dragon-like,
do
and
you,
yeah.
do you have a succinct 2 or 3 sentences for those who missed and don't know to say what is draconic astrology?
Well, draconic means dragon-like. Lots of jokes on Twitter, or X as we must call it now, about me being a dragon. But essentially, you're looking at another type of zodiac, and it's all about the nodal axis, the moon's nodes. And basically, you're creating a new chart by moving the north node in your chart to 0 degrees Aries. And the extent to which that chart is different from the tropical depends on the distance in degrees between the natal north node and 0 degrees Aries. And that, in essence, creates another chart which says different things. And last time we talked about draconic, it was very much about life purpose, soul purpose. But one of the things I've discovered, and Pam Crane has discovered, and other astrologers besides, is that it can be used as a timing technique as well. So looking at forecast charts is a good way of demonstrating how sometimes the draconic approach is so obvious, it clarifies, it's like, it removes a filter, and it seems to focus very keenly on the main themes. And in a moment, we'll look at Britney Spears to show what's going on in her chart. The best thing, going slightly beyond your 2 or 3 sentences, is the best thing to do with draconic is to always start with the chart that we know, the tropical, convert it into a draconic, and all astrology software programs, you can do that in about 5 seconds. Once you know where to find the draconic option, that is. And then you can create a secondary progress charts. You can do solar returns. You can do midpoints if you want. So you can even do horary. I don't actually do directions and horary at the moment in draconic, but it can be done.
That'd be interesting to see as well. So talk us through then. Are you saying that when we're forecasting using a draconic chart, we're using the original draconic chart and we're then seeing transits happening to it? Or what are we doing exactly?
So what we're doing, in the sense of turning the natal chart into a draconic chart, that's still a draconic natal chart. So that's one thing. The next thing to understand is that you can then look at the draconic ephemeris, or use the software program to see where the transits are at any particular moment, whether tropical or draconic. So there is actually a draconic ephemeris. And the thing to understand is that the planets in the draconic chart move faster than the tropical. So the sun, for example, a solar return happens after about 11.5 months. For Mercury, I think it's about 13 months, something like that, it's a bit more. But the fact of the matter is it all happens a lot quicker. And even Pluto will only spend a maximum of 18 months in a sign, whereas, of course, in the tropical, you can stay there for 10 years or more, as you know yourself. So, but there's a technical thing that you've touched upon in your question. How do you create the solar returns and the secondary progressions in the draconic chart? Well, that's easy. You obviously can't convert them from the tropical because that's a different zodiac. So you have to convert the tropical to the draconic version. Then, using the software program, you can take the option of them producing a draconic secondary progression chart, or a draconic solar return. So you basically have a draconic birth chart with a draconic solar return around it.
So I can hear people in the audience going, what? A draconic ephemeris?
I know.
And what's it based on?
Let me prove it to you. It's a big book. Oh, you can't see it. It's getting lost. It's getting lost. I'm trying to... Anyway, it's thick. If you dropped it on an ant's nest, you wipe it out. It's that heavy, but essentially it's based on the movement of the nodal axis, which of course, as you know, moves retrograde. There's the mean and the true. I'm not going to get into an argument about that, but but if it's the true, then sometimes it goes a little bit direct for a few days, but the trajectory is retrograde all the time. But in Draconic astrology, that's converted into direct motion. But even in the Draconic ephemeris, periodically Draconic planets will go through a retrograde. And that can be very interesting when you're looking at someone like Britney Spears, who we'll see has a certain retrograde planet long term, which is deeply relevant to the whole question of relationships, both parental and intimate, if you like. So it's these very strange, if you understand astrology in the beginning, and you understand what a retrograde is all about and all the rest of it, then what becomes apparent is that if you know what themes you're looking for, particularly in the life of a personality or celebrity, it's very interesting to see how Draconic emphasizes that relevant planet. Of course, there's only one way to do, and that's to demonstrate it.
So let's do that.
Well, what I'm going to do is to share my screen. Now, I will seek your forgiveness in advance. I've had to take this from a talk that I've given before. What I'm trying to do, I've got about 90 frames. Can you see that?
I can see it very clearly.
So I actually primed it to start with Britney Spears. That's me being clever, of course. I mean, just depending on time, it's up to you too. I mean, you may feel that Britney Spears is taking up a lot of time, but it can also be demonstrated with Pope Francis I when he made a declaration that he thought that same-sex unions should be honored. And there was a very strange development in his Draconic chart when he did that. That's another subject. There's also King Charles's chart is also very interesting, just to demonstrate something. But we're looking at Britney Spears. So shall we talk about Britney? Dear old trouble. Every time I go on Instagram, Anna, I'm faced with a near nude Britney Spears dancing ferociously to Madonna. And she's obviously in her drawing room or living room or some open space within her house. And it's quite extraordinary. This almost manic energy she's got at the moment. And as we know, she's just separated from her partner. Now, let's talk about Draconic. What we're looking at here actually is, let me just get this right. Yeah, we were looking at the Draconic chart just now, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. I think if I just work very quickly through the process, then we can all see what's happening. So we're looking at Britney Spears' tropical birth chart, the one that we're all familiar with. And we see that the most important thing, just because we haven't got time to go through everything, but the thing to keep an eye on is that Venus down in the 4th house in Capricorn square her Saturn and Pluto, which I think prefigures the problems that she's had with the conservatorship, with her father, with parental figures in general. So we see immediately that it's actually built into her chart that she's got problems. You'll be seeing other things as an experienced astrologer yourself, but let's focus on her relationship problems or her problems with relationship in authority or with parental figures. And of course, that Saturn is made problematic too by Pluto being, it's pretty close to that Saturn. And so that adds to the problems. It sort of brings power as an issue. So bear that in mind, even in the tropical chart, we're seeing that problem.
Indeed, especially as Venus is also the chart ruler here. And
exactly. Yeah.
And there's also, she's conjunct the South Node, and
yeah.
And on the plus side, there is a mutual reception happening there between Venus and Saturn.
Yes, there is that.
But nevertheless,
I think Pluto frustrates that mutual reception.
Exactly. Yeah, as I say, Persephone meets Pluto, nevertheless.
And it's interesting too, the clue. I mean, as astrologers, we're always trying to find the uplift as well. But the trajectory of the nodal axis is towards the challenge, which is the North Node. And we find that in Cancer, which is relevant to the whole family theme. But it's also, although some would say it's out of orb, but it is perilously close to that lovely Fortuna. So I think there's an element of the self-expressive and also to do with family. I think we both know that astrology works in a multifaceted way. And the more experienced you become, the more nuanced your readings can be, without necessarily having to apply rules absolutely strictly. Let's have a quick look at the Draconic version, which is interesting because suddenly what I've noticed, you'll notice that Venus now is in its strength in Libra. And what's interesting about that is that when a planet is promoted, as I call it, or demoted, which is basically all about dignity and so forth, that's the area to watch. There may be more than one area to watch. But to me, it tells me that there's the potential within her life, or there is the challenge within her life to actually make relationships healthier. There's still that square to Saturn and Pluto because the planets don't change in their alignments. What they change are the signs and the degrees. And that's the thing to remember. So the Draconic chart is confirming something, but emphasizing the importance of relationship. And so that we see that it now is opposed by Fortuna and North Node, obviously in Aries. So there is a striving towards independence from.
Yes. And
yeah.
I would say with the North Node in Aries that, well, with Fortuna being so close and emphasizing that Aries side, that it's also about independence, freedom. Freedom. And when I say independence, I mean personal sovereignty.
Yes. And there is a literalness. I said to you earlier, and you know it yourself, Draconic is a literal reading. The whole conservatorship business, which ended in 2021, was a lot to do, not just about her career, but a lot to do with her career. Because on the one hand, she couldn't make vital decisions for herself, but on the other hand, was required to work. So this person who supposedly was incapable of running her own affairs was nonetheless generating tens of millions of dollars from her shows. Yeah. So that's very strange, isn't it? And of course, we have the dispositor Mars in the 12th house in Gemini, which is perhaps not the happiest place for Mars to be because it tends to be hidden away. But there's not much we can do about that because that's built into the natal chart. But it's interesting that it's in Gemini, which therefore also brings the question of the voice, also whether you're gagged or not.
And Saturn here is also in Gemini, of course.
Yes.
Gemini ascendant. So there's that whole thing about being able to speak. And I was just thinking how her career was the means of her imprisonment until she was able to reclaim her personal sovereignty again. And so there's that emphasis of the 10th house. But I think also looking at this Draconic, that MC is in Pisces. And that whole theme of sacrifice, where she had to work but not for herself.
Yes.
Is a very interesting theme,
and it's interesting it's in the Draconic chart. So that may get converted to something else in the course of her life. I mean, self-sacrifice can easily become something else where you broaden your aims in life, and Pisces would encompass that possibility. To be honest with you, Anna, I don't see much likelihood of that at the moment, because I think she's still in the shadow of the conservatorship and the memories. And I think, as we'll see, I think that the whole parental thing, that issue's not over. Can I just demonstrate something else that's literal about her? If we go back for a moment to the tropical, we see that she's got all that Sagittarius down in the 3rd house, which is interesting. But in the Draconic chart, it becomes much more appropriately Leo, which is very much more to do with what we know of her as a creative artist and the use of the voice and so forth. I know we've got Uranus. We're applying the equal house because I've got a bad habit of only using the equal house. So you can use Placidus if you want to. If you want to use whole signs, please be my guest. I'm not going to argue with you. But I have found in my client work that the equal house system, generally speaking, seems to be more appropriate. But that's just me. So running after me, Chris. Oh, I didn't say that. Anyway, let's move on. Things I come out with. It's all your fault. So let's move on. Now, what have we got here? This is just, we won't talk too much about this, but what's interesting is that what we've got here is the inner wheel is the tropical chart that we know already, and the outer wheel is the Draconic birth chart. And isn't it interesting? Right away, we see the challenge, Pluto right at the top, on the MC in Cancer, very tight as well on the degree. And this tells me that the challenge for her of transformation arises from family issues. That's the literal description that I would apply, relating, oddly enough, to her public profile and career. So we have here a literal translation of what we know. And when we talk about forecasting, it's not just about saying what's going to happen on the 6th of April, 6th of August. It's also about forecasting in general terms what the life challenges are. So it is built into her birth charts that she's going to undergo the greatest pain and, shall we say, opportunity for change in the family terrain. And also we have Venus rising in the Draconic chart, which again emphasizes the importance of the relationship issue and getting that right. And it's quite a challenge because it's close to the tropical Mars. So there's conflict built into this chart. And if we think about it, most of her adult life appears to have been about a conflict with her family, if not with her partners. And fundamentally, I think this is about her own personal independence. We also see that the Draconic moon is exactly on the tropical Saturn, obviously still close to Pluto. So here we have restriction. I think I would interpret it that way. It's, in a sense, forecasting that she will have to face the boundaries and restrictions of authority, or the father figure, if you wish to recognize Saturn as the father figure, or even the conservatorship, or the court system even, although you would normally say Jupiter for that. But Jupiter's actually in a dissociate stellium there in the first house. I'm sure there are other things besides that we can see, but that to me is what screams out as, in a sense, forecasting, if you like, what the primary, and unfortunately, because it's the birth charts, we're talking about an ongoing challenge. It's not something that's going to be resolved just by a court.
No, I was also just thinking about that Saturn there in the tropical chart. It's in Libra. It's conjunct the Draconic moon, but
Yes.
it's actually the ruler or the dispositor of the tropical moon. So there's something here, I think, about perhaps a disconnection from her own emotions, her own feelings. Moon in Aquarius is notorious for that emotional detachment. And then we have this Saturn connection that's echoing that, I think, where it's just, I'm not allowed to feel.
That's a very good observation. Excellent observation. Very well put. And in a funny sort of way, I don't know what you think of Draconic Saturn up in the 9th, opposed by tropical Neptune, which I think is interesting too. So we've got the fogginess, the boundary, the lacking of boundary of Neptune, or confusion even, with the boundary themes of Saturn, and the conflict between the, because powerlessness can be one of the themes of that.
Yeah, and I'm looking at that Mars in the 12th and thinking about that as well, because it's like there's no will, not allowed to have will, being silenced. It's my will never be done, kind of thing. But then I'm also thinking of that in the context of the 12th house being about those inexplicable experiences of life and the confusion between what's real and what isn't. And I think that's important because here that Saturn-Neptune opposition that you're highlighting is across the 9th and the 3rd. And we have Neptune causing confusion in terms of who's right, who's wrong. Is what I believe right? Is what you believe wrong? And then Saturn sitting there in the 9th and going, you believe what I tell you.
That's it. I mean, and of course, it's on that axis of communication. We're dealing with cadent houses here. So, I mean, it's all very interesting. And I think we could write an essay about each aspect, quite frankly, because I do find, looking at it even now, I'm finding new things to observe. It's interesting, for example, that with Venus, the Draconic Venus conjunct the Draconic South Node, that there is a journey to be made from this reliance on others, even reliance on partnership. And there we go back to Aries, but now sitting around the descendant area. In Aries, we've got Fortuna there. So it's been shifted to the area of relationship, which is another area to do with it. So we see immediately that there are huge problems which have to do, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it's not for us to get into the reasons why she split with her recent partner, but it'd be very interesting to see what the issues were, to what extent she felt constrained or contained.
Yeah. I what I feel here looking at this chart is that there's some karmic stuff to be worked through to balance up themes of independence, personal sovereignty, and will versus collaboration and the desire or perhaps the need to be agreeable. So if we take that agreeableness in terms of the psychological definition of it and the need to please others in order, it's I would say in a submissive sense that a dog would be submissive or show submissive behavior in order to placate a possible aggressor, whether it be a dog or another dog or a human being. Dogs will very often show submissive behavior in order to placate. And I think that there is something about Libra doing that in its shadow. I'll say anything, I'll do anything, as long as you don't reject me, as long as you're not mean to me, as long as you don't hurt me. And there's something of that with Pisces too. Of course, it's, the two, I would say, are high on the agreeableness spectrum, to the extreme of actually putting themselves at risk of becoming victims for somebody who is, let's say, not nobly minded. And so you have those extremes. And I think this chart is all about, or these charts are showing that polarity of experience. And she's having to work that out.
And absolutely. And again, we've said that the Draconic chart is alarmingly literal. I shouldn't say alarmingly, but I'm always alarmed. But if we have a question mark about the nature of relationship being the issue, shall we say, I mean, obviously there are other things going on, but if you look at Draconic Chiron down in the 4th house in Capricorn, we see that it's sort of touching the South Node and Venus in the tropical chart. So this is a further point. It's almost like you could see a big Monty Python hand pointing at Chiron to say that we tend to speak of the centaur as the wounded healer, but we can put it in other terms, that the area of hurt, the things that need to be addressed if they're to be resolved, we've got it bang on South Node and Venus, and these are the areas that we must move from, because the trajectory of the nodal axis is always towards the North Node. We want to get away from what we know and what we've had to put up with.
Yeah. And of course, then you look at that North Node being in Cancer, and we're having to understand feelings. And this is a part of the life's work, is understanding how I feel, understanding how you feel, and what that means in order for us to be able to relate.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Very important.
So you could see that we could speak for another hour or two about this chart, because it resonates. It's so, and it's not about us seeing patterns in clouds, because you can see the aspects very plainly. And by the way, my guilty secret is I tend to take more notice of the conjunction than any other aspect. Of course, you're going to look at the oppositions and the squares, but the conjunctions speak very plainly. It's really quite amazing. Let's have a quick look at I don't even know what I'm coming up with next. Oh, yes. Now I've just got to do something. Yeah. Now this is to do with the conservatorship, and I'll explain what we've got here. So I've converted the natal tropical chart into a draconic birth chart, which is the center chart, the inner chart. And we have this is the secondary progressed draconic chart. So what I did was I turned the tropical chart into a draconic chart, and then I produced a secondary progressed chart from that draconic chart. And it's very interesting to see. And there's one thing I would put, you're going to see, obviously, because it's progressions and they move very slowly, the outers we can more or less forget about because they're basically in the same spot. Sometimes you will see something from the slight movements, but you don't have to do that in this instance, because if we go down to the fourth house, I'm going to show the 2023 version of this chart in a minute just to illustrate something. But isn't it strange that she was released from her conservatorship on the 12th of November 2021. There'd been quite a build-up to it. And what we see is that the draconic sun is applying to conjoin the draconic secondary progressed south node, which itself is conjunct the draconic tropical Venus and south node. And this is telling me something. Although it's not an exact conjunction as such, but with progressions, you're not necessarily looking for precise event correlations. What you're trying to do is to find what's the big theme going on here. And what we do know is that progressed sun is going to move very slowly towards that south node. And that south node triggers the Venus themes. And if I just show you now, I'll come back to this chart in a minute. This is the 2023 version. So we're looking ahead a little bit to the 12th of November. Forget about the 12th of November bit for the moment, because the progressions move so slowly. But what we see is that the sun has just passed over the south node. And isn't it interesting that the whole issue of relationship has arisen again in her chart as her partnership disintegrates? But also I associate the south node and the sun together as something else, the challenge of reclaiming your identity, or even literally reclaiming your stardom. And if you look at her career, that both on a personal level, the relationship, but also what she's trying to do in her career, she's trying to start up her career again because it's gone into the doldrums. But in fact, yesterday, Madonna offered to help her out, which was very nice of Mrs. Leo. So, I mean, I'm just throwing that in as a slightly naughty reference. But we see with the progressions, if you were looking at this chart and you didn't know who we were talking about, you'd be saying, well, this person is facing some pretty difficult relationship issues and also trying to reclaim something that she may feel that she's lost.
Yes. The truth, though, being that if I was counseling her,
okay,
say, stop thinking about it as something that you've lost because you never had it. It's yeah.
That could be a feature of her independence, you see.
Exactly, because I feel that how did she get into such hot water in the first place? It's because she was lost. And so I think we need to, I would want to work with her so that she had a sense of herself, independent of anything, whether it's career or, because it seems to me that her self-worth is totally wrapped up with her career, and it's been created by other people because they were profiting from her.
Absolutely.
And I would humbly suggest that until she stops wrapping her self-worth around her fame and her earning power, she's not got anything yet. She needs to almost divorce herself from that to see who she is outside of that, and then build something from that, like a tabla rasa. She's got to start from scratch.
And that's Aries.
Yeah.
And it's in the 10th house. Okay. That's still but that's life, not just career, but life direction. or life
Exactly.
purpose even. I'll tell you something else that's interesting. So in the draconic inner wheel, Mars, I mean, Mars is not necessarily stifled in the 12th house, but as you said yourself, it can be an area of confusion. It's interesting that both Marses are in Gemini, but the secondary progressed Mars is in a better place, the first house. So what this tells us from an astrological symbolic point of view is that there is the potential here for her to find that independence, or even literally her voice.
Absolutely. And therefore she needs to be very careful about the choices she makes now to stop herself from repeating old patterns. And that comes back to self-worth. And the reason that I'm talking about self-worth in this way is because we are looking at the sun and Venus as being very important here. So this is huge. It's knowing that she is worth who she is, not because of her fame, not because of her earning power,
Yes.
but by virtue of just being her. And I think that that's huge.
It's a very good point. And it's no mean challenge either,
No, it
because
is.
of the concentration of planets in the fourth house.
That's right. So this is
Or points.
yeah.
Yeah.
So as always, looking at charts, it brings out tremendous compassion in me.
Well, you're a natural count. I mean, it's interesting. The difference between us is that I strive not to counsel, because most of my readings, you may be appalled to hear this, are not a conversation. I can do Zooms, and I do enjoy, whatever I do the Zooms with a client, I think, well, I should do more of those. Because they invariably end up as a conversation of some sort, even though you're delivering some information. But then the person will want to respond.
Yeah, and that's what.
I don't have your psychotherapeutic background, but I do have some common sense. I think.
Well, but is not as common as we would like and is much valued.
Well, let's hope. I mean, but the thing is, for me, the interesting thing is that most of the work I do are for people I've never met and I know nothing about. And so when I'm looking at the chart has to speak to me. I mean, a client recently sent me almost like a biography of themselves. And I sort of skipped over, and I wrote back and I said, it's lovely to tell me all about yourself, to share your life story, which you didn't have to. But I said it more for my sake than hers, because I don't want my mind to bring expectations to that. I'm not suggesting you do for one moment, because I'm sure you're
No,
aware of the need.
no, absolutely. I don't like it if people tell me anything in advance. And the last thing I would ever want to do is look somebody up in advance of meeting them, because the chart is enough. Why would I do that when the chart is enough? And I don't want to have any preconceptions. I want it to be about that chart, what that chart tells me, and then the interaction between me and the person in front of me. That's really, really important. It's everything, because it's not about me or what I think. It's about understanding the person in front of me via this vehicle that is the chart.
Yes.
And then my experience comes in to help them in any way that they need. And that's a different thing. But first comes them. And it's always about them. It's always centered on them. So yes, I fully understand your feelings on this.
It's an interesting, I mean, it's a subject in its own right, the client. We've got a lovely interview with Stephen Forrest on the subject of astrology and psychotherapy, but I won't go into that now. But if anybody wants to get another perspective on this, Stephen Forrest he's part of the evolutionary astrology movement. So he's got some interesting ideas about past lives and things like that. I just want to see, is that it? I just want to check whether I didn't know whether you just wanted to talk about Britney Spears, but I did do a chart this afternoon about King Charles.
I In terms of time,
I think we've probably gone over, haven't we?
we're okay today for this, because what I really wanted was to help everyone who's interested in draconic astrology take it to the next stage, so that, as always, when we're forecasting, what we're doing is we're helping people make sense of the present and what's happening, and seeing the possibilities for how that might play out. And so I wanted to give those who are interested in draconic astrology um, an idea of how to progress it further, no pun intended there.
Shall we stop at Brittany then?
So I think we'll stop at Brittany.
Well,
Thank
I'll
you.
just stop the share then, if that's okay with you.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said at the beginning, you can do not all midpoint systems. You'll have to look into it more. It's not the place to go into that kind of specialism. I'm not a great belief. Oh, it's not a belief thing. It's just I don't feel the need for midpoints myself, even though they illustrate and add like a punctuation. But I've not personally found that I can't find anything in the Ptolemaic aspects without going to the midpoints. But certainly it's worth looking at the secondary, because you saw that Britney thing, and you made a lovely observation there about not only do you get the context, in this instance, that relationship and old set patterns, and that's a destructive behavior, particularly with the square with Saturn and Pluto. So that's setting the situation, but then you've got a hint of where we should be going into that lovely Aries in the 10th house, and how you defined independence. But you'll find this, whichever technique you use, whether you're draconic transits or whatever, or even the draconic solar return, which is intriguing, you will find a literalism that you don't always find if you just look at the tropical transits.
No. Well, I will be putting a link to your book, Chasing the Dragons, in the description box. And if you are interested and you have been experimenting with draconic astrology, but you haven't yet read Victor's book, I would recommend that you do so, because you have a great chapter on forecasting. And I know that because I was reading it for the second time. So I've read it once, I've read it twice, and I thought, you know what? I think it would be good to have you back to talk about this. Think of any other aspects that will bring you back, Victor.
Oh, it's an endless pit. I think we're going to meet soon, and not meet, but are you going to be at the Brighton Astrology Circle soon? Are you giving a talk?
Yeah, yes.
I'm the acting chair, so I shall have the pleasure of introducing you.
I know you are. I was very excited to see that. So thank you again, Victor.
Thank you very much, Anna. Always a pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. I'm not sure what we're doing next time. So that is a chapter yet to be written. Until then, have a great day and a great week. Goodbye.